Hey everyone, it's Howard Everett, and welcome to Uncle Howie's podcast. And I really hope that you are enjoying our talks, and I really hope that you're getting something out of it. And so my goal here is to help as many young men as possible make good decisions. This is a podcast for men who want to be better men. It's pretty straightforward and simple. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to have my first guest on, and so I'm so excited to have a podcast with a guest. And if you know someone who's really good at mentoring young men, or someone who's really spoken into your life that would make a great guest on a podcast, please introduce them, put their information in the comments here, and I will look at all that. Someone from my office will certainly see it. And so today's podcast is about being a trustworthy man. One of my favorite ancient Hebrew teachers, you might have heard of him, his name is Jesus. Jesus said, "Let your yes be yes and let your no mean no." What does that mean? That means you don't have to go around telling people, I promise you this, I promise you that. Look, there's a time and a place for that. There's a time and a place to sign a contract. I'm not saying that you can't ever sign your name to a document. If you're going to borrow money to buy a pickup truck someday, you're probably going to have to sign some documents promising to pay it back. What I am saying is that in our day-to-day relationships, you want to be the kind of person that when you say, yes, I will do this, or no, I'm not going to do that. I'm drawing a boundary here. You cannot count on me to be a part of that. I want for people to respond to you as though they know that when you say something, you mean business. And so a lot of people don't grow up like this. If you grew up in a household, with one parent and they didn't always tell you the truth, then that can sometimes set a pattern where you're not always committed to telling the truth. And I just want to speak to you and encourage you. I want to get you into the habit, and I want you to want to be in the habit of speaking truth, but speaking the truth in a loving way. So you don't have to be vicious or mean when you tell people the truth. You can be very kind, but you can say no to people. And that when you do say yes, when you make an agreement, I want the people around you to know that they can count on you to do it. There's a young lady that works here in my office, and we're really good friends. Her and my wife are, constantly chattering with each other, and she's amazing. She's very helpful. And when this company's big enough to need more like executive help, she will definitely be my primary executive. And anyway, we were talking about trust and just, people that scam you, people that do and say things that aren't trustworthy. And I said, if I ever tell you that I'm going to do something, if I tell you this will be done in a week, and a week later it hasn't been done, it's probably because now you have to go to my funeral. And what I mean is that if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm either going to do it or I'm going to die trying. And so this is a value. This is something that was modeled to me by a guy named Fred. It was my foster dad. And I lived with Fred for 4 years. And so I got to see for 4 years this amazing man who, he did not always tell us the things that we wanted to hear. And there were times when he could be a little bit harsh. Imagine raising your own 2 biological children plus 12 foster sons at a time, 12 teenage boys that you and your wife did not give birth to. And so, what a responsibility. And so, there may have been some times under pressure or when things were stressing him out on the farm, on the ranch, where he didn't exactly come across as a tender, loving person. He could be hard on us sometimes. But let me tell you, if Fred told us that something was going to happen and it was within his power to happen, Fred was going to make it happen. And so I got to see this model of a really amazing man who was benefiting all the people in his household plus people in the community. Think about the benefit that he provided to my mom by raising me for 4 really difficult years. As a single mother, it would have been a lot harder for her, and the results would not have been as good. And so, this was a man who was committed to being a benefit to other people. And one of the reasons he was so trustworthy was because if he said yes, he meant yes. And if he said no, he meant no. And so how do you become a person like Fred? How do you become a person like me where your word means something and where you begin to value that level of honesty and a commitment to truth in such a way that it impacts how other people perceive you and begin to follow you? And so, especially as a leader of any kind, you should adopt this saying from Jesus: let your yes be yes and let your no mean no. So I want to share with you my 3 favorite things about being trustworthy. And the first one is how I feel about myself. I feel so good knowing that I am not out to cheat or deceive people. And I want to be totally honest with you. There were times in the early part of my career, when I finished my business degree, I got a job in sales, and there were guys who were teaching me how to do sales who on a regular basis were fairly deceptive. And I just, I remember going home at night and I thought, these guys make a lot of money. I'm probably not going to make as much as them because I'm just not willing to exaggerate the benefit or, finagle the cost. I decided early in my career that I wanted to be like Fred. I wanted to be like Jesus. I wanted people to know, even if they didn't become my customer, that they could trust me if they ran into me in some other, part of the marketplace. And so what happened was I began to see that, very few of these straight commission salesmen were 100% committed to telling the truth. And so what happened was I began to stand out. And here's another benefit that happened. People who did business with me, who could trust me and realized that I was very much different than most of my peers, would begin to refer other business to me. And so ironically, in the beginning, I thought that it would cost me money to be an honest person. But what I found out was it actually made me money because people bring people around people that they can trust. And so the first thing that really benefited me about determining that I would be a trustworthy man was that it benefited me financially and it made me feel really good about myself. The second benefit is that other people are always looking for someone that they can count on and they can trust. And when you become that type of a person, you have a tendency to play a bigger role in their lives. And so I've had, followers in the military. I've had, dozens of foster kids. I've had family members. I'm not just say, hey, look, I'm really trustworthy. If you knew me personally and followed me around, you would begin to realize that if I tell you something, it's true. And so this habit of wanting to be a trustworthy man has paid off hugely in my relationships with people. Although I'm going to be very honest with you, there are people that do not want the truth. They want to be flattered. They want to be complimented. They want to be told how magnificent and wonderful and beautiful they are. And I'm not very good at that. I've decided that if someone comes to me, if a woman says, do I look fat in this dress? And she does. I'm going to say, yeah, but I will help you get in shape. If you want to go to the gym or you want to go on a diet, you want to learn how to do fasting, I have all types of help for you to get in better shape. But if a fat lady asks me if she looks good in a dress, she is going to get the truth. Now, I'm not going to say it in a mean way, but I am not going to lie to make her feel better. And so there are definitely people who do not appreciate someone who's absolutely committed to the truth. I've had people say to me, there's a time for a white lie. My answer to that is, if that's how you want to live your life, I'm not your judge. But I can tell you that I'm not going to tell you a white lie. This is an opportunity for me to be incredibly honest with you. There have been times where I've gotten home at night and realized that I stretched the truth or exaggerated some things. And so I have made some phone calls and said, hey, I just want to let you know, when I told you that story, some of that was a little dramatic. And so when I catch myself doing something that isn't entirely true, I have a tendency to go back and correct the record because I don't want to have to remember anything. If you tell someone a lie, you have to remember what you said because later when they ask you about it, you're going to remember the truth, but you're going to struggle to remember the story or the variation that you told them. And so the third thing that I really, really like My third favorite thing about being a trustworthy man is that I can tell people the truth and then forget about it because I don't have to remember the details of any stories that I made up. And so it keeps me off the hook. It takes a lot of pressure out of your life if you're just committed to telling the truth. And I want to just say one more thing about that. If you're being interrogated, if you were taken captive, if you were arrested, you're driving one night and they pull you out of the car and put you in handcuffs and start to ask you questions. In America, I'm sure this goes to lots of countries, but in America, you are entitled to say, I don't want to answer any questions without my lawyer. And so you can get a lawyer and whisper your story in the lawyer's ear, and then the lawyer can represent you, even at the police station. You don't have to wait until you get to court for that. How this would work around the world in countries where, people may not have the freedom to not answer questions is that you can take your time and think of a way to tell the truth in a way that doesn't incriminate yourself. Unless you're guilty. If you committed that crime and you get caught, I still think the best policy is just to tell the truth and take the consequences and move on from that. I'll tell you one story that really encourages me. There was a man in the Old Testament, and his name was Joseph, and he got in trouble. He got sold into slavery. His brothers sold him, and he wound up working for a rich man, and then he was in jail for a while. And while Joseph was in jail, he started to really impress people with the way he told the truth. And then someone came to him and he was able to interpret their dreams. So he was talented, but he was also just a real man of character. And he got out of jail and wound up being essentially the prime minister of Egypt. So there was a king, a pharaoh, but he was the man that ran the government for the entire nation. And he decided that he would, save back some food, basically not spend all of the wealth of Egypt. And when he did that, his own family, the brothers who had betrayed him, came all the way from where they were into Egypt, and they asked the pharaoh for help. And this prime minister, who was, dressed in a Egyptian costume, they did not recognize their little brother Joseph. But here he was standing in a room, able to save the lives of his brothers and all of their families because he was a man of integrity. And so telling the truth will put you in a place where you can really do people a lot of good. And that's kind of what we're after, right? Like if you're attracted to this podcast, you probably want to be the kind of person who's going to wind up helping other people. You want to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And so let your yes be yes and your no be no. And please share this podcast with some other young men and some moms who have adult children. Thanks.